Hello and welcome to Access Asia. I'm Yuka Royer. Coming up in this week's edition, millions are in need of urgent humanitarian assistance in Pakistan as many parts of the country continue to be threatened by the worst floods in its history. How well is China's economy doing? With Beijing's draconian zero-COVID policy stifling growth and climate events compounding the problem, we'll take a closer look at the financial health of the world's manufacturing engine. And is Bollywood facing an existential crisis? After a series of flops this year, the Indian film industry is struggling to come out of its COVID doldrums. We begin in Pakistan, that's grappling with the worst floods in living memory. 1/3 of the country is underwater. Over 6 million people are in urgent need of humanitarian aid as exceptional monsoon rains washed away entire villages and devastated farmlands. In the southern Sindh province, authorities are racing against time to reinforce riverbanks as water levels in Mancha Lake, the largest natural water body in the country, have risen dangerously high. France 24's Shahzad Wala and our team on the ground sent us this report.
This canal next to the city of Sevan is overflowing. On the right side of this bank, the agriculture fields and villages have submerged underwater. On the bridge of the canal, worried residents are gathered.
I used to live there, right next to the canal. It's fully gone, all the crops. I come here every day to see the situation. It rises a few feet per day. We are afraid that the bank will break.
The local authorities have hired these workers to reinforce the bank. With bare hands, they are lining up rocks against the sand barrier to keep the city safe from the raging water.
When the water level rises, it erodes the sand from the bank, so we put stones down to reinforce it. It's an emergency, so we do it by hand. You see over there, the water has already narrowed the bank.
All over the province, displaced families have set up makeshift camps on the highways. They have fled their submerged villages and are now living in despair. Zamir Hussain lost everything when his house was flooded.
This is where we sleep. This is our kitchen. My house has been flooded. There are mosquitoes. They bite us day and night. We are afraid of catching malaria. There are also scorpions here. 2 children have been stung. I've been here for 10 days. No one helps us. People come and watch us and they leave.
This family fled barefoot after water entered their village at night. They couldn't take anything with them.
We don't even have any flour or fresh water. Nothing to eat. We're forced to beg. My little daughter went out to beg in the street today.
The situation is likely to worsen as more rain are forecasted in the coming week.
Severe weather events have also hit China this summer. A record drought and heatwave damaged crops and caused power shortages across the country. This just added to challenges already facing the world's second largest economy. Brian Quinn takes a closer look at the state of the global economic powerhouse.
Deep in central China, as firefighters battled wildfires, crops wilted amid a crippling drought. But this summer's severe heat waves didn't only threaten homes and food. The Chinese economy, too, took yet another hit. Sichuan province gets some 80% of its power from hydroelectric dams, and historic low water levels have meant factory shutdowns due to lack of electricity. Toyota, Foxconn, and Tesla among the companies forced to idle production lines.
There are very important companies there making cars, batteries, microchips. This meant breaks in the supply chain, not just for those shuttered factories, but for the companies they supply with parts in other provinces.
2022's drought comes on the heels of more than 2 months of COVID lockdowns in Shanghai, sending the economy in China's premier business hub down 13.7% in the second quarter. During the worst of spring lockdowns, President Xi Jinping's strict zero COVID policy is believed to have cost the country some $46 billion per month, 3.1% of GDP in lost output. And the headwinds don't stop there. Last year's debt default by Evergrande, China's second-largest real estate developer, is just one of a host of failures in the country's property market. Once a key driver of China's growth, the real estate sector accounts for some 30% of GDP and 70% of household wealth. Now, though, 50 million housing units sit empty or unfinished as companies can't afford to complete construction.
The construction sector creates jobs and attracts enormous amounts of investment as it's an important driver of Chinese economic growth. But the investment boom has been too big, and today many property developers are left with too much debt.
The government says it's targeting annual growth of 5.5% for 2022, while IMF projections put the figure closer to 3%, the country's lowest growth rate in 40 years. Unemployment payouts, meanwhile, hit a record high in June. China's central bank has been ramping up its stimulus efforts by lowering key interest rates in a bid to encourage investment. The country's expansion has been a major driver of global GDP growth, its slowdown signaling trouble ahead not just for China, but for the world economy overall.
So could China's runaway economic success be drawing to a close? Well, to get a deeper insight into the country's future, let's cross now to Beijing to speak with Michael Schumann, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub and author of Superpower Interrupted, The Chinese History of the World. Michael, thank you for joining us. Now, just a few months ago, some forecast that China could overtake the United States as the world's #1 economy by 2030. In the second quarter of this year, the country's economy barely grew. Why has the picture changed so dramatically?
Well, in my view, those assumptions that China was going to overtake the U.S. in coming years were kind of always too simplistic. And I think what's happening now, though, is economists are starting to wake up to that the Chinese economy has a lot of very serious deep-seated problems that are going to hamper growth in coming years. The immediate focus has been on issues like China's zero COVID policies, where you've seen a lot of lockdowns of cities, industrial areas, and that's hurt growth in the immediate term. But the problems are much deeper than that, and in a growth model that's generated a lot of wasteful investment, a lot of debt. You're seeing that right now in the very serious problems that the property market is having, and these problems are not so easy to solve.
Now, you mentioned the housing market there. Now, its collapse may seem like a domestic problem, but would it have an impact on the global economy? And also, with many home buyers expressing their anger, could it potentially destabilize the country?
Well, the slowdown in the property market will have an effect on the global economy because the property sector in China has been very, very important to, for example, global commodity markets, stuff like iron ore that you use in construction. In terms of the domestic economy, the issue that the Chinese government is facing is that a lot of middle-class families have a lot of their wealth wrapped up in their apartments. And as you're seeing the property market destabilize and you're seeing property prices decline, this is going to be very painful for a lot of families. It's going to impact their ability to spend, which means it has an overall impact on the economy beyond the property market itself. And it will create a lot of resentment and unhappiness within the major cities that the Chinese will also, for a Chinese government that's very obsessed with social stability, then this is something that should be concerning for them.
And what next then for China? Are authorities likely to take any bold steps ahead of the Communist Party Congress next month, at which President Xi Jinping, of course, is seeking an unprecedented third term? And what could be the potential political fallout of the ongoing economic slowdown?
Well, I think what's interesting, and to the credit of the current team of policymakers, they have not tried to repeat the mistakes that they've made in the past, which is simply flood the economy with credit, pump up the property market and other markets again, and kind of kick the can down the road. I think on the flip side of it, though, that they don't seem to have a plan right now for dealing with the problems of the economy, and especially the property market. They seem to be going on a kind of an ad hoc basis. In terms of the political fallout, you would think with the economy doing this badly that would cause a leadership to rethink perhaps what they're doing and where they're going. But right now, the consensus is that Xi Jinping will be able to break with prior precedent and stay in power for a third term. That still seems very much on track.
Well, Michael Schumann speaking from Beijing. Thank you once again for speaking to us. And finally, the global cinema industry has been recovering from the COVID-19 downturn, but in India, the once booming Bollywood is in trouble. Facing competition from streaming services, Indian filmmakers have been struggling to release a hit film, with more than 3/4 of movies released so far this year turning out to be flops. Catherine Clifford has more.
A tiny audience trickles into this New Delhi cinema, keeping people away from the big screen. The rise of cheaper small-screen streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime during the pandemic, and a growing dissatisfaction among younger generations who see Bollywood as passé.
The storyline is the issue, and since the past 2 years, the audience has been exposed to so many new themes, and they have been introduced to new concepts as well. So that is why I guess Bollywood is lacking in that area, and they are not taking films seriously.
Playing to an audience of empty seats, Lal Singh Chadha is a Bollywood adaptation of Forrest Gump, starring A-lister Amir Khan. Industry players had high hopes its release would reverse the decline of box office sales, falling every month since March. But it's made only around €6.8 million, a fourth of its budget, while past Cannes films recovered all costs within a week. 77% of this year's Bollywood releases have been flops, losing at least half of their investment. This is around double the failure rate of 39% seen in 2019. Amid the upheaval, the industry is looking inwards.
Stars cannot operate at the current price levels because it will make most of the films loss-making. Producers have to focus more on the idea or the story than the stars. They have to look at, is there something new that they are saying which has not been said before? Is there something that can surprise the audience?
Award-winning actor Akshay Kumar acknowledged A-listers like himself have their part to play in keeping the industry afloat.
Films are not working. It is our fault. It is my fault. Okay? I have to make the changes. I have to understand what the audience wants.
Once a pillar of Indian culture, Bollywood must now adapt in order to survive.
That's it for this week's edition of Access Asia. Please do stay tuned to France 24. More world news coming up.
Pollution from the oil business is devastating Gabon.
On a enlevé ça parce qu'il y a trop de brut. C'est trop.
J'étais pêcheur, j'ai dû arrêter.
Activists are speaking out about constant leaks.
Il y a un pipe là-bas qui a cédé. Du pétrole brut s'écoulait dans la nature sur un rayon de plus de 400 à 500 mètres.
But what's behind these successive spills? Our observers in Gabon bring you first-hand accounts of an environmental catastrophe. Don't miss The Observers on France 24 and France24.com.